The snow fell in soft, relentless sheets, blanketing the narrow streets of Eldridge Hollow as Clara Grayson gripped the steering wheel of her battered old Jeep. It was December 22, 2024, and the dashboard clock blinked 6:47 p.m., its dim green light casting a faint glow on her daughter's face. Sophie, 9 years old and small for her age, sat in the passenger seat, her mittened hands clutching a crumpled paper bag. Inside were gifts she'd spent weeks crafting, hand-drawn cards, each one a labor of love, adorned with uneven crayon lines and smudged glitter. Clara's chest tightened as she glanced at Sophie, her daughter's wide hazel eyes fixed on the road ahead, shimmering with a hope Clara hadn't felt in years. "Do you think they'll like me, Mom?" Sophie's voice was barely above a whisper, fragile as the snowflakes melting against the windshield. Clara forced a smile, her lips trembling despite her effort. "Of course they will, sweetheart. Who wouldn't?" But the words tasted like a lie, bitter and sharp, because she knew the truth Sophie didn't. The house they were driving toward wasn't a place of warmth or welcome. It was a mausoleum of memories she'd buried a decade ago, a place she'd sworn she'd never return to. Yet here she was, breaking that vow not for herself, but for Sophie, whose innocent question 3 weeks earlier had unraveled everything. "Mom, do I have a grandma and grandpa?" Sophie had asked one chilly November night, her voice cutting through the hum of their tiny apartment's radiator. Clara had frozen, a mug of tea halfway to her lips, the question piercing a wall she'd built brick by brick since her divorce 5 years prior. She'd left that life behind, her parents, her brother, the suffocating expectations of the Grayson name, when she walked away from her ex-husband, Tom, and the family that had never forgiven her for it. Her mother, Evelyn, had sent a single text after the split. "Divorce is a failure we all share." Her father, Walter, hadn't bothered to reach out at all. To them, Clara was a ghost, and she'd said herself she preferred it that way. But Sophie didn't know that history. To her, grandparents were storybook figures, kindly old souls who baked cookies and told tales by the fire. Clara couldn't bear to shatter that dream. Not when Sophie's world had already been chipped away by a father who'd vanished without a goodbye and a mother who worked double shifts at the diner just to keep the lights on. So she'd nodded that night, her throat tight, and said, "Yes, you do." And now here they were, barreling toward a past Clara had tried to outrun. All because Sophie deserved a chance to believe in something bigger than their cracked little life. The Jeep's tires crunched over fresh snow as they turned onto Maple Lane, the street where Clara had grown up. The houses glowed with Christmas lights, reds, greens, and golds twinkling through the dusk, but the Grayson home loomed at the end like a shadow against the festive cheer. Its gray clapboard exterior was unchanged, the porch sagging slightly under years of neglect, the windows dark except for a faint flicker in the Levy-wying room. Clara parked at the curb, her hands trembling as she cut the engine. The silence was deafening, broken only by Sophie's soft gasp. "It's so big," she said, peering through the fogged-up window. "Do they have a tree?" "They always did," Clara murmured, her voice hollow. She remembered the towering pines her father would drag in every December, the way her mother would fuss over the ornaments until every branch was perfect. But those memories were laced with others: Walter's sharp critiques, Evelyn's icy silences, the way they'd made her feel like a stranger in her own home long before she'd given them a reason to cast her out. "Wait. Let me go first, okay? Just stay here for a sec." Sophie nodded, her trust absolute, and Clara stepped into the cold, her boots sinking into the snow. The air bit at her cheeks as she climbed the porch steps, each creak of the wood a reminder of the girl she'd been: timid, desperate for approval, always falling short. She raised a fist to knock, but the door swung open before she could, revealing Evelyn in a crisp red sweater, her silver hair pulled into a tight bun. Her mother's eyes, pale blue and unyielding, met Clara's with a flicker of surprise that quickly hardened into something colder. "Clara," Evelyn said, her tone clipped. "I didn't expect you." "I didn't expect to be here," Clara replied, forcing her voice steady. "But Sophie wanted to meet you. She's in the car." Evelyn's gaze darted past her, landing on the Jeep where Sophie's small silhouette waved through the window. For a moment, something softened in her mother's face: curiosity, maybe? But it vanished as she stepped aside. "Well, come in then. It's freezing out there." Clara waved Sophie over, and her daughter bounded up the steps, her red coat dusted with snow, the paper bag clutched tight. "Hi," Sophie chirped, her breath puffing in the air.
"I'm Sophie."
"Are you my grandma?" Evelyn blinked, clearly unprepared for the child's brightness. "Yes, I suppose I am," she said, her hand hovering awkwardly before resting lightly on Sophie's shoulder. "You've got snow on your shoes." "Oh, sorry." Sophie kicked her boots against the porch rail, then stepped inside, her eyes wide as she took in the house. The Levying room was just as Clara remembered: polished hardwood, a pristine Christmas tree in the corner, every ornament gleaming like it belonged in a catalog. Walter sat in his leather armchair by the fireplace, a glass of bourbon in hand, the TV murmuring a football game. He didn't stand, just tilted his head slightly, his gray eyes narrowing as they landed on Clara. "Didn't think you'd show your face here again," he said, his voice gravelly and flat. "What's this about?" Clara's stomach twisted, but before she could answer, Sophie stepped forward, waving shyly. "Hi, Grandpa. I brought presents." Walter's brow furrowed, and he set his glass down with a faint clink. "Presents, huh?" He glanced at Clara, as if expecting an explanation, but Sophie didn't wait. She knelt by the coffee table, pulling cards from her bag and laying them out like treasures. One for Evelyn with a glittery star and Grandma, scrawled in purple crayon. One for Walter, with a lopsided tree and two stick figures holding hands. Cards for Uncle Daniel, Aunt Laura, and even Cousin Mia, who lounged on the couch, earbuds in, oblivious to the scene. "I made them myself," Sophie said, her voice trembling with pride. "Do you think you'll hang them up?" Evelyn picked up her card, her lips thinning as she studied it. "Very colorful," she said, setting it aside without opening it. Walter took his, unfolding it with a grunt, his expression unreadable. Clara watched, her heart pounding, waiting for the inequality dismissal, the cutting remark, the cold laugh she'd grown up dreading. But Sophie's light didn't dim. She sat back on her heels, smiling, as if their silence was approval enough. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with unspoken history. Daniel, Clara's younger brother, emerged from the kitchen, a beer in hand. He'd moved back home after his own marriage crumbled, a mirror of Clara's failures in their parents' eyes. "Hey, kid," he said to Sophie, taking his card with a nod. "Thanks." His gaze flicked to Clara, then away, a silent acknowledgement of the rift between them. Mia, Laura's teenage daughter, barely glanced up from her phone. "Cool, thanks," she mumbled when Sophie handed her a card, her thumb still tapping the screen. Laura herself was absent, likely at some holiday party. Levying the family fractured as ever. Clara sank onto the edge of the sofa, clutching a mug of tea Evelyn had thrust into her hands. She wanted to scoop Sophie up and run, to shield her from the indifference seeping through the room. But Sophie stayed steady, whispering to Clara, "I think they like them, Mom." Her optimism was a knife in Clara's chest, beautiful, unbearable. Then Walter stood, his chair creaking, and shuffled to the tree. He pulled out a small box wrapped in silver paper, a gold bow perched on top. "Here," he said, handing it to Sophie. "Found this with your name on it." Sophie's face lit up, her fingers trembling as she took it. "For me." She sat cross-legged on the rug, peeling the tape with care, unfolding the paper as if it were precious. Clara held her breath, a flicker of hope sparking despite herself. Maybe he'd softened. Maybe. The box was empty. Sophie's hands stilled, her smile faltering as she peered inside. Then up at Walter. "Is there something else?" He chuckled, a low, bitter sound. "Kids these days. Always expecting the world on a platter. Life doesn't work like that, little girl." The room tilted. Clara's VY shone blurred with rage and shame, her hands curling into fists. Sophie's eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. She hugged the box to her chest, as if willing it to hold something real. Mia smirked, popping an earbud out. "Just like her mom, thinking showing up gets you something." "That's enough," Clara snapped, her voice shaking. "Mia, don't." "What?" "It's true," Mia shot back, shrugging. "You ditched us and now you're back with some sob story? Pathetic." Clara stood, her tea sloshing over the rim. "We're Levying," she said, reaching for Sophie's hand. But Sophie shook her head, her voice small but firm. "Wait, Mom." I have one more gift. Clara froze as Sophie reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a folded sheet of paper. She stepped toward Walter, her hands trembling but her gaze steady. Grandpa, this is for you. It took me 4 days to make. Walter raised an eyebrow, his smirk fading as he took it. Another one? What's this, a sermon? No, Sophie said softly. It's just for you. He unfolded it and Clara saw his face change, his jaw tightened, his eyes softened, a flicker of something she hadn't seen in years. She couldn't see the drawing from where she stood, but she watched him stare at it, his bourbon forgotten on the table. The room went still, the TV's drone fading into the background. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out, disappearing down the hall toward the study, the paper still in his hand. Evelyn frowned. Walter, she called, but he didn't answer. Daniel exchanged a glance with Clara, his brow furrowed. Mia rolled her eyes, muttering, "Weird." Sophie looked at Clara, her voice barely audible. Did I do something wrong? No, baby, Clara said, pulling her close. You did everything right. They stayed through an awkward dinner over cooked ham. Evelyn's clipped small talk. Daniel's silence, but Walter didn't return. Sophie picked at her food, her eyes darting to the hallway, waiting. Clara wanted to scream, to demand answers, but she held it in for Sophie's sake. When the night ended, they retreated to the guest room, Sophie curling up with her teddy bear, whispering, "Maybe he'll come back tomorrow." Clara didn't have the heart to say he wouldn't. The next morning, Christmas Eve, they left before dawn. Clara scribbled a note, "Thanks for having us." Clara was Sophie and tucked it under a magnet on the fridge. Sophie didn't protest, just followed her to the Jeep, her shoes crunching in the snow. The drive home was quiet, the radio playing faint carols, Sophie's gaze fixed on the passing houses. Clara's chest ached with guilt and relief, a tangled mess she couldn't unravel. Back in their cramped apartment, Sophie went to bed early, her energy drained. Clara sat by the window, staring at the city lights, replaying every moment. Had she been wrong to bring Sophie there? Had she set her up for heartbreak? She didn't know. But when she tucked Sophie in, she noticed the empty box on the nightstand, a silent testament to her daughter's resilience. 3 days later, a package arrived, no return address. Just for Sophie, scrawled in Walter's jagged handwriting. Clara's heart raced as she handed it to Sophie, who tore it open with cautious excitement. Inside was a wooden music box, its surface etched with tiny flowers, and when Sophie turned the crank, Edelweiss spilled out, soft and haunting. A note slipped from the lid. "Thank you for reminding me of her." Sophie beamed. "It's from Grandpa, isn't it?" "I think so," Clara said, her voice catching. "Who's her, though?" Sophie shrugged, cradling the box. "Maybe someone he misses." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She dug through an old shoebox of keepsakes, letters, photos, a faded Polaroid of her grandmother, Margaret, singing to her as a child. Margaret, who died when Clara was 12, her warmth a stark contrast to Walter's sternness. Had Sophie's gift stirred that memory? She didn't know, but the music box felt like a crack in the ice, a whisper of something shifting. A week later, Daniel called. "Dad wants to see Sophie. Sunday afternoon. Just her." "He won't say why." Clara hesitated, fear and hope warring inside her. "Is this a trick?" "I don't think so," Daniel said, his voice low. "He's been different since you left. Quiet. Keeps that drawing by his chair." She agreed reluctantly, and on Sunday she drove Sophie back. Walter met them at the door, no bourbon, no sarcasm, just an old man in a worn sweater, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen. "Hello, Sophie," he said, stepping aside. "I've got something to show you." Clara lingered on the porch as Sophie followed him inside, the door closing gently behind them. She wandered to the backyard, where Daniel sat on a rusted bench, smoking a cigarette. "He's been listening to that music box non-stop," he said, exhaling a plume of smoke. "What the hell did she give him?" "I don't know," Clara admitted. "But it reached him." Inside, Walter led Sophie to the living room, the music box on the table. He sat across from her, his hands clasped. "You asked if I listened to this," he said, nodding to the box. "Ido. Every night." Sophie smiled. "Mom said Grandma Margaret loved that song." She did, Walter said, his voice rough. She'd sing it while baking bread. I haven't thought about that in years. He picked up the drawing Sophie had given him, the original, not the copy, unfolding it carefully. It showed 3 figures, Walter, Margaret, and Sophie, hand in hand, a loaf of bread on the table. Below in shaky letters, I hope you smile again. Mom says you used to a lot. Walter's eyes glistened, a rare vulnerability breaking through. She'd be sad if she saw me now. I've been angry too long. Sophie tilted her head. But you're not angry today. He chuckled, a sound Clara hadn't heard since childhood. No, not today. They talked for an hour about Margaret, about stories Walter had buried, about the bread he used to bake with her. Sophie listened, her presence a balm, and when they emerged, Walter's hand rested lightly on her shoulder. Next time bring your mom too, he said, glancing at Clara. She's tougher than I gave her credit for. The weeks that followed brought small miracles packages for Sophie. Sketchbooks, paints, a photo of Margaret holding a young Walter smiling. Each came with no note, just Walter's handwriting on the label. Clara didn't write back, didn't call, but she kept his letter. Your mother was right about you. That little girl is wonderful. I hope you're doing okay in her drawer. A quiet testament to a bridge rebuilt. One night, as Sophie hummed Edelweiss before bed, Clara asked, Do you think Grandpa's still sad? Sophie paused, her music box in her lap. Not as much. I think he's learning to be happy again. Clara smiled, pulling her close. Sophie had done what she never could, reach past the walls, the pain, the years of silence, and found the man Walter used to be. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a beginning, fragile and real, born from a child's kindness and a drawing that refused to be forgotten.